it doesn't come to me.
You don't mind if we record you telling the story, do you?
Huh?
You don't mind if I record you telling the story just for
No.
us to have it?
Uh,
I want to have it.
but after your dad and his flight,
Mm-hmm.
they had been in on a bombing, strafing mission,
Mm-hmm.
trying to shoot down some Germans. And then it was sort of customary that the flight leader, who was your dad,
Mm-hmm.
would stay behind while the rest of the flight headed back to the base.
Right.
And be just one more or one less person in the stack,
Sure,
to
sure.
land.
Yeah.
And so when he and what he would do is he would go down and he would make one or two strafing missions
Mm-hmm.
over their target,
Yeah.
and that way that would activate his gun cameras,
Yeah.
and he would bring that back to the intelligence people back at the base.
Mm-hmm.
So he started back to the base, and he said, I was just up there kind of wool gathering and, thinking about this and that and something else. And he said, I just looked straight ahead through my windshield and through my gun sights, and there was this German airplane.
Yeah.
And he said, oh my Lord, he said, I nearly tore the trigger off trying to get a hold of it. And he said that he fired, he was just flying right up this guy's tail.
Yeah.
And he said, and I grabbed I grabbed the guns and started shooting, and he said I just started, and I was too close because our guns converged at something like 500 yards.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
Right.
and I had that and had four 50 caliber guns on each side.
Yeah.
And he said, and they came together like that. He said, well, I was too close. And he said, I just shredded this guy's wings
Oh, man.
and some of the tail surface.
Yeah.
And so he said the guy wibbled his wings, wobbled his wings.
Yeah, I guess.
Wibble, wobble.
Wibble wobble.
You seen one, you seen them all. And he said that, and dropped his gear, his landing gear.
Mm-hmm.
And he said the guy went down, and he said he was right over a British airfield,
Wow.
which was and it served for us as sort of an auxiliary.
Mm-hmm.
If we were shot up and run out of gas or something
Right.
like that, we couldn't get back. He said then we would land on the British.
Right.
And he said that the last thing he said, I flew once and turned around, came back and went over again low and slow. And he said I could see these British Tommies, running out there with their
Yeah.
rifles.
Wow.
They surrounded this airplane, and this guy stopped, and I could see him opening his cockpit
Wow.
and climbing out. And so he said, I went on back over to my base and landed and reported in safe and turned in the film and did this and that. And then I called over there to the British base.
Yeah.
And I told them, I said, I'm the Thunderbolt that just shot that 109 down,
Mm-hmm.
shredded him, and I'd like to get credit for it. And he said, okay. And he said, and I would like to have an opportunity to speak to this German pilot, since he obviously, you know, he landed, he had a hard landing, but he had a, you know, it was one he could walk away from.
Yeah.
And so,
I love that he wanted to do that.
huh?
I love that Daddy wanted to talk to him.
I know, that's interesting.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, the old saying, any landing you can walk away from is a good landing.
Right? Yeah, there's a certain affinity for pilots.
And they're
Yes,
still
right.
saying that.
Yeah.
And so anyway, he said when I made arrangements to catch a ride over there to that field. And he said, and when I went over there, and they finally took me in and checked me out and made sure I wasn't armed and
Right.
all this and that and
Right.
something else. And took me into a room, and he said, there sat this German pilot officer, and I forget what his rank was. He was something. He was a higher ranking officer. He was
Wow.
like a colonel.
Wow.
And he had and when my uncle walked in, was one of the British officers there introduced him. He said, you know, this is Colonel so and so,
Yeah.
and this is Colonel Poole or Major Poole or whatever he was. I forget his
Captain,
rank at
probably
the
by then.
time.
Was he captain then? Or I
And
might have
said
just been
he's the one who
lieutenant.
shot you down. And said this German looked at me like he'd like to get up and slap my face.
Yeah.
And he said, "Why did you shoot me down?" And your father answered, "Because you're a German,
There you go.
and that's what I get paid to do,
That's right. That's right.
shoot down Germans."
Wow.
And the guy said, "Well, I was coming over here to surrender."
Well, who
Well,
knew that?
Who
And
knew
he
that?
said, he said, "Didn't look like it to me." Said, "You
How
had
do
your
you
gear up.
Yeah.
You're going in low and slow over an enemy airfield." Said, "Looked like to me that you getting ready to shoot the place up."
Yeah.
And this colonel said, "No." He said, "I was coming in to surrender." And he said, "If you will search my cockpit, you will find some very, papers there
Mhm.
and things that would be of interest to your intelligence people."
Wow.
And my uncle said, "Well, that's good." He said, "I'm glad we got those, and I'm glad we got you down alive, and
Yeah.
got your plane and everything
Wow.
else." And they talked back and forth, and my uncle said, "You speak very good English." And the guy said, "Well, I was educated at what is that British university that's so famous?"
Oxford or
Yeah,
Cambridge?
came one of those,
Uh-huh.
Eaton?
Yeah.
Oxford or Cambridge. And he said, yes. He said, that's where I polished my English. He said, I already knew a lot of English.
Yeah.
He said, a hell of a lot more English than you Americans know about
Yeah.
German.
It's truth.
He said, we figured by the time we get through, and everybody over here is going to be speaking English anyway.
There you
So,
go. Daddy was a good American, right?
so anyway, they kind of started loosening up and joking,
Yeah.
and they smoked a cigarette, and they brought them some coffee, and
Wow.
I think they had a good visit. And so when your dad said, "Well, I'm out of time. I've got a ride waiting out here to take me back to my base,"
No.
and he said, "I'm glad there's no personal animosity. I'm glad that you understand that I was just doing what I'm just instinctively trained to do."
Yeah.
And so they stood up and shook hands, and then this German said, "Well, I would imagine that where I am going now not have any further use for these wings. And he said, you know, I worked hard to get these wings to learn how to fly.
Wow.
And he said, and you know, since you're the one that brought me down, it seems sort of fitting that you should be the one that would have the wings.
Wow.
So he took his wings off, unpinned them, and he gave them to your dad.
I think
My
that's
dad-
that pear. That
Yeah, I'm
looks
sure it
like
is,
an
cause
eagle.
it's in
Right.
there, oh yeah, it's
Yeah.
definitely, cause it's got the
It's very
swastika on
German.
it.
It's got a
Yeah,
swastika on it.
it's
It's
the
like an
swastika,
eagle.
and it's
Yeah.
in
And it's-
one of his
it-
claws.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a bird. Yeah,
It's a
it's an eagle.
Yeah. And,
Wow.
so he,
That's
What an
amazing.
interesting encounter.
No,
it was
Yeah.
an interesting encounter. Your dad had more interesting encounters
no.
between, what was the,
Patton and
yeah, Patton, and what was the guy who was,
oh
Oh.
yeah. I know.
you know who I'm
Never
talking
met a
about?
man I didn't like.
Huh?
Never met a man I didn't like.
Yeah.
Come on, y'all.
I know, I'm
Yeah,
trying to think
oh
of-
yeah, western guy.
Never met a man I didn't like.
Will Rogers?
Yeah,
Will
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 Rogers.
Rogers, yeah.
And so he was,
I
he
am
was
my
on a
father's
first name
child.
basis with Will Rogers. And, he said that when he and a friend had gone to a Will Rogers show at one of the theaters there in downtown Abilene.
Yeah.
And so he went there and he said they saw the show and everything. As soon as it was over, said they just hurried outside, down the alley to the stage door, you know, they were
Yeah.
all, and there was already a crowd accumulating. And Will Rogers stood out there signing autographs and talking to these kids, and you know, and he just all of a sudden he just looked at your dad and his buddy, and he said, "Well, you boys better come go with me." And they said, "Well, where are you going?" They, "Well, I'm going over here to Roscoe or somewhere with
For Pete's sake.
the
Yeah.
rodeo."
Yeah.
And he said, I've got a show to do there at the rodeo. And they said, "Do you really mean it about us coming?" He said, "Sure. If
For
you can
heaven's
come,
sake.
well, let's go." And he said, "You better call your mama first."
Yeah.
So, they
Yeah, 'cause
grabbed,
Uncle
they
would've
just,
whooped him,
you know, tore the place down, finding a telephone, and
Yeah.
and he called Mama Pooh, and he said, Will Rogers wants so-and-so and me to go with him over to Roscoe to the rodeo. Said he's doing a show there at halftime, and he's gonna feed us and everything, and then he'll bring us back. And so she said, "Well, all right, but you boys mind your manners, you know."
Oh my gosh.
You know, so off they went, this big touring car across the highways of West Texas,
Yeah.
heading out there to the rodeo. And of course, we got out there and they found them seats up there in the
Sure.
stands, and he said they sat up there, and of course he went out there and he got on the stage, and you know, and he did some of his rope tricks and he did some of his
Yeah.
stories and did all this talking and everything. And then finally, when it was time to leave, well, he shook hands with each of them, told them they were good boys, and he was
Yeah.
glad to have their company. And so they got back in their car. He told the driver, he said, "Now you take these boys back to Abilene."
Wow.
And he said, "When you
That's
when you
amazing.
get there,
Isn't that
well,
something? Oh,
he
goodness.
said, you
That
said,
is
the
amazing.
driver said, you tell the driver where to take you." You know, he told the driver where his street address
Yeah,
was, and
sure.
they took him and his friend and let him out,
My gosh.
and no problems, you know. It was
Yeah.
great.
Hmm.